All right, hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Caine Prize event for 2021. We are here with Rebel Women Lit, and I'm Jherane. I'm the founder and kind of the head cook, bottle washer here at Rebel Women Lit, and we are building a literary community here out of Jamaica and with members across the world. We're really excited to be partnering with the Caine Prize today to be talking with two of the shortlisted writers about their work, the impact of their work, what it's been like being shortlisted for the Caine Prize, and what their next steps are in terms of publishing, writing, and building their own communities. So I am going to welcome Doreen and Irene to the stage. Let me add them. Thank you so much for joining us and for your work, for sharing your work with the world. And I'm really happy that the Caine Prize is shining even a bigger light on your work today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be in this space.
Perfect. So I'm going to ask that we start with just a reading. And Doreen, would you mind going first?
Thank you for inviting us.
You're welcome. So Doreen, would you mind reading first for us? And we're just gonna get off stage and you can read 5 minutes of your work, and then Irene, I'm gonna ask you to do the same after.
Sure. I'm going to read Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Doreen Baingana, and I'm going to read the opening of my short story, Lucky, for just about 5 minutes. Maybe I should, okay, I won't, since I'm the opening, I won't set it up. I hope it can speak for itself. We've been left behind. It's another morning, so we're in the school garden looking for lunch. The maize is still too young, too dark a green, but what can we do? It's not easy reaching for the long bulbs with yellowy wisps like white people's hair. The leaves cut our arms and legs with their razor-sharp fuzz because they don't want us to steal their cobs. But that doesn't stop us. The ache of emptiness keeps us going. Those who pick more will eat more, so we work as fast as we can. All around me, boys crabble around, making the dry leaves on the ground crackle as loud as roosters. Or does it seem loud because the rest of the school is silent? But the hunger can make you do things. 3 days ago, Ochiti and Bosco clambered over the fence and ate like 20 hard green mangoes from the old orchard that is now more like a forest. Rumor says the owners went into exile long ago, England or somewhere. But how we laughed at those two when they spent the whole night running back and forth from the pit latrine, laughing to cover our jealousy because at least they had felt full, content for a few hours. Envious because they were brave enough to venture out of school. What with all the stories of the Lakwena rebels roaming around, and worse, the new government soldiers who still behaved like the rebels they had been for, was it 6 years? This is why school has closed and why 11 of us are stuck here. We can't go back to our homes in the north, Gulu district, West Nile. There's nowhere to pass because of the fighting. Everyone else lucky enough to leave or have relatives in the south has left. My Auntie Joyce is in Kampala somewhere, but I don't know where exactly, and I don't have her phone number or anything. I tried calling my father back home in Aboke to ask, but his number was off. And the headmaster, big head, since his competes with the hippos, shrugged as he took the office phone from my hands. That was it. I was staying. And yet he, whose job it is to take care of the school, took off with the rest and left us. He didn't even turn his hippo head to look back at us as the school bus rumbled out of the gate, packed full of teachers and students like onions in a sack. Only Mr. Komakech, the mouthy maths teacher, has stayed behind with us. Even the workers have left. Can you imagine? Koma, as we call him, because he never stops talking, said he wanted to enjoy the war properly. And we laughed and laughed. But it seems he's stuck here too. He can talk us to death, but for some reason, my eyes can't stop following how his large lips chew around the words like they're tasty. Don't ask me what the war is all about. The new government army of former rebels was now fighting rebels who had been the old government army. So what's the difference? They've switched places like we did back home when we were 7, 8, those days. Ugandans versus Tanzanians, and the rule was that the Tanzanians had to win because they had saved us from Idi Amin. Oh, but it was wild running through the compounds, scattering the cackling chicken, dogs barking with excitement and joining us as we scrambled through the shambas, wind whistling over and under our shouts. Pow! Pow! Got you! Die! Shooting each other dead with stick guns, screaming, falling, then getting up, brushing off the dust and dried leaves and changing sides. I was really good at falling in slow motion, arms and legs flailing, body jerking in the dust, like the soldiers on Bob's father's TV, which he allowed us to watch from the outside, peering in through our windows. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much for reading. I am going to invite Irene to read 5 minutes of a separation, and then we'll come back to talk about them.
Thank you so much, Doreen, for that brilliant reading. It's funny, you read a story and then you hear the author read it, and there's another layer of meaning. It was beautiful. My name is Iryn Tushabe. I am Ugandan, born and raised, and moved to Saskatchewan, Canada in 2007 to study at the University of Regina. And I currently still live here in Saskatchewan, where I work and live. And I am going to read from my shortlisted story, which is called A Separation. And I will start the next segment. At this point, Harriet has been living in Regina for 3 weeks, just 3 weeks. And I'll just carry on from there. 3 weeks later, I'm standing by my open living room window, looking down at the street, watching people go about the business of living. I arrived in Regina, Saskatchewan on the tail end of summer. The August heat has turned my apartment into a sweltering cavern. Mr. Stevenson, the silver-haired professor who met me at the airport, will be supervising my doctoral research. He also found this Monroe Place apartment for me. I can't seem to say the street name right, though. Is it Monroe, as in Marilyn Monroe, the deceased American actress, or Monroe, like a row of moons? 2 teenage girls walk by, sharing a blue slushie. The one with the thick mass of coffee-colored hair takes a sip and hands the cup over to her friend, whose short hair is tinted the bright pink of a well-fed flamingo. Sticking out blue tongues at each other, they double over in laughter. They are wearing high-waisted shorts so short that when they bend, I glimpse the lobes of their flat buttocks. Dark clouds have gathered above the high-rise across the street as though getting ready to pounce. But the sunlight pierces their serrated margins, turning them into silver beacons. The sound of my cell phone jolts me. The call has a Ugandan country code. Kaka! I shout into the phone. My elation keeps her name in my mouth longer, making it last. Harriet, it's me. My father answers, his voice loud and strident. A call from father frightens me a little. Always I phone him. It's never the other way around. His preferred medium of communication is email, lengthy reports with headings and subheadings. The last one had an index and a couple of footnotes about his observations of infanticide amongst chimpanzees in Chibale Forest, our sanctuary's rainforest home. Did I know that contrary to previous observations of infanticide, deadly aggression in chimpanzees is not a gender-specific trait? Are you there, Harriet? I brace myself. I'm here. It's about your kaka. Father's voice suddenly acquires an uncharacteristic softness. She has died. He likes directness, my father, and sharp things. He has a prized collection of spears and pangas in his office that he says our forefathers carried with them when they migrated from Rwanda many centuries ago. In this moment, his words are a machete that cuts me to the core. I feel empty, as though the part of me that's most substantial has left, leaving me hollow, only skin and bone. My hand goes limp and slowly falls from my ear until finally the phone hits the carpeted floor. I can still hear father, but his voice is muffled and distant, reaching me as though through a tunnel. I lower myself into the dining chair that has found a permanent place by my living room window. I finger the cowrie shell necklace around my neck, wishing to go back in time before having this knowledge, back in time when I felt whole. Time passes and it doesn't. Father's faraway voice through the phone stops, and silence eclipses the room. How long have I been sitting here lost? He'll be worried, want to know I can be strong. I hear the ping of email arriving. It's from father. Kaka went missing the evening before, and when she didn't return by nightfall, he put together a search party. A game ranger found her body lying among the moss under a tree canopy behind the waterfalls. It was lucky he found the body when he did, before some wild animals got to it. That would have been gruesome, father's email says. I wonder about the moment my kaka became the body. Did it hurt? Or was it peaceful? Outside, the dark clouds have huddled closer together, blocking out the sun. Then slanted lashes of rain beat down from the sky, battering the window pane like they want into my apartment. I pull on my sneakers and fly down the stairs, a caged bird let loose. I run toward Wascana Lake, a path shown to me by Mr. Stevenson. Gaining speed, I part gray sheets of rain as hot tears run down my cheeks. Every few minutes, bolts of lightning fire up the black skies, followed by a ripping sound like a great big cloth being torn down the seam. I splash through silver puddles, pulling on the concrete lip of the lake. I want so badly to go back home.
Thank you both for reading. And you're right, just listening to the stories come to life, it took me right back into the moments that I was reading and so engulfed in these stories and these worlds that you have created. And thank you so much for sharing these worlds with us. One of the things that really struck me about how both of you came to this place of writing about grief. Doreen, you do it in a very comical way, which seems like the words you won't associate with a story about war is that there's so much humor with our main characters. And Irene, the way you deal with grief, it's very logical. It's very, this is what's happening, this is what's clear. And even the main character is trying to be like, this is the type of person I am. But then when it comes to her dealing
That was lovely, Irene. Thank you.
Oh, it was incredible to hear your story, Doreen. I love hearing stories from Uganda. Sorry, I'm stealing the conversation from you, Jherane. But because that's how those voices, that was my voice at that age,
so
growing up.
I'm curious about as both of you as Ugandan writers, what informs the way you approach dealing with grief and talking about it in your stories?
Do you want me to go first?
Please, thank
Do
you.
you see Jherane?
Doreen, I think there might be a lag.
Okay.
Are you hearing me?
I'm really sorry. My internet is not the best. I'm in Entebbe, Uganda, so please bear with me. So please repeat the question.
What informs the way you write about grief in your story? Because I think you took both very different approaches to dealing with it, but it both felt very Ugandan, very real. How did you write about this?
Well, I can go first. I think, as we all know, grief is universal. So I wasn't really thinking, it's also subjective. I wasn't really thinking of maybe a Ugandan way of expressing grief, but I was thinking about how a young boy would react to loss and loss that happens in the moment. And the only way he can is just physically right there in the moment doing what he can to, I don't want to give spoilers, but perhaps people have read the story, doing what he can to sort of make the person that he didn't really like but already misses as comfortable as possible. So I'd
Mhm.
wanted to make it as physical as possible.
And it's very humorous, I find. Your story is very funny, even though it's dealing with these very heavy topics of war and a child dealing with war. Ooh, I think we're having internet issues again.
Oh.
Yeah, I know that when, oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Okay. When
Huh.
Oh no. Okay. Uh,
No, that's
hopefully Doreen's able to rejoin us. But Irene, could you just let me know what you thought about that?
yes. So your question was about processing grief and
Mhm.
how that relates to Uganda as a country or as in a
Are
region in the world.
you as someone who experienced grief, because what I found interesting was the shift in how Harriet dealt with her mother's passing versus her grandmother's passing. And of course there's age that comes into that and more maturity, but
Yes.
that she was more willing to accept a different world, a different interpretation of dying was interesting to me.
For sure. And honestly, I think that my treatment of grief in this particular story sort of emerged organically in service to the story. Harriet is she's about to do her PhD in anthropology, and she's someone who believes in logical, quantifiable, explanations of the world. She wants evidence, if and her grandmother is completely different. She has been raised in a generation of people who have a different view of death. And as someone who raised her, she's tried to imbue these beliefs into her granddaughter, who's, essentially she's brought up as her own daughter. And so when she dies, there's an element of that degree of removal, that she's not there with her, that she cannot participate in the sorts of rituals that we have, funeral rites and grieving and mourning with people who know the person that has died, and she can't be there for that. And I think that really heightens her grief. And in a way too, when someone we know, all of us, when someone we love dies, we can get stuck in the moments that we last saw them. And in this story, that's, I think, when around the third rewrite, when I realized that I should write this in the present tense, all of it. And it could be a sort of amalgamation of, because she's beginning to see those last moments together. They're so immediate, and she's looking at them from a different lens, a lens of death. And it's every gesture, every word that was spoken, every hug, every embrace, it takes on a new meaning right now. So she wouldn't have been thinking these things when she was saying goodbye to her grandmother. But now, with the knowledge that her grandmother has departed from this world, it's a lens that's infused with grief and longing. And she wants to go back home, but she cannot. She's just arrived. Yeah. Does that kind of make sense? I tend to rumble.
And
Yeah.
as you bring up the idea of community and rituals and the way that you process grief differently when you're around people who are also sharing that experience with you. Now she's in Canada, and no one around her has no
Yes.
grandmother. No one around her understands that, what it means to be around a presence like her. And
Yeah,
it
for sure.
to me, why did you select 3 weeks away from being at home, and there's just sudden death? Because at the beginning I'm thinking, oh, she'll be home for Christmas. Yeah.
Right. Yes. You know, I didn't. This story, the seed for this story, is a real event. It's the death of my grandmother. She died. I'd last seen her in 2010, and then you leave people. I'd gone back home. I'd just had my daughter, and I went to show her my daughter, and they had such a great time together. She could not put her down, and I thought, obviously, I'll come back very soon, But she seemed so healthy, and we spoke on the phone multiple times when I left, but then she died quite suddenly when I was here, and I was still in journalism school. I could not, I could not afford the ticket prices, to go back home. And I remember when I saw the text message from my sister, and after my husband had cried with me and he left the room, I sat back down on the bed, and I knew it was just me in the room, but I did feel a hand on my shoulder. And I'm not someone who believes that the death can, physically reach out from beyond the veil of death and touch us in a physical sense. But I felt that hand, it was just felt so real, real enough to stay with me that it could be the seed for this story. And I guess in writing the story as fiction, it's bizarre, but fiction lends itself so well to truth telling in a way that nonfiction doesn't always allow. So I found that the more I fictionalized my grandmother and the events around our departure from each other, the closer, the more intimate, the more personal they got.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's that the degree of removal, just not being able to go back, it does something to your grieving process. And it's been happening a lot, of course, with COVID, with people dying even just in the same city, but you're not allowed to participate in their funeral because of the health guidelines. And it's just so heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah. As you speak just of rituals and community, and I'm thinking about the realism. It's something that, especially here in the Caribbean, it's something that we deal with, the duality of thinking, oh no, once you die, there is no spirit world. But then there is all these stories and all these experiences of you having where you have interacted with a world that is not logical, the world that you don't learn about in school, and then you add layers of Christianity on top of that tells you this thing does not exist. But it was interesting to me going through that story with Harriet, as someone who is dealing with her logic of what the world should be versus her experience of, I'm almost certain that was my grandmother who that is with me. So it was really a beautiful story that came together with that.
I wanted to, I still remember it. Just to comment on what you said about the different layers of understanding about death in the Caribbean. I didn't know that point of view, but I did want to mention too, like I was raised a Christian. So like the view that I expressed about death not being the end, perhaps they have a foundation in Christianity, but mostly they have also a foundation in Nyabingi, the goddess who I mentioned, who is quite a popular one.
How do you pronounce it?
Nyabingi.
It's interesting. So we read it for Twitter Spaces on Sunday, and we all said Nyabingi because that's how we pronounce it here in Jamaica.
You have her in Jamaica?
Yes. So, but we pronounce it differently. So now I need to go find out what happened.
No, but it makes sense though. It makes sense. So I don't know what the origins would be for her there.
But we all had that moment of recognition when we were like, Naya Bingi's in this story. And we're just like, we need to find out. But now you're saying it, you're pronouncing it differently. So I'm like, what happened?
It could very well be the same goddess. She's part of a pantheon of goddesses, but she's the one I chose because I think she's kind of badass. But in my language, in my tribe, my language, Bachiga, we have a way. It's just a way of contracting words, and so that it just doesn't even always become clear where one ends and where one starts. So it could very well be the same goddess, but we pronounce them differently.
I know.
The name.
My first recognition, I was just reading, and it's like, oh, man, Binky's in the story? Where does this come from? So, but go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off. You were saying.
So yeah, no, I meant to say that we all have, however logical I am, there are beliefs that we all have that don't have foundation in logic. And I think that's something beautiful about the world, is that the world is full of doubt, and you can't ever be so certain and so confident about, what you know, because a world without contradictions, what is that? It's a false world. It's not real. And in fiction, as in life, people have to be believable, and the world has to be believable in order to make a lasting impression on both the writer and the reader.
Okay. Doreen is back.
Hopefully, oh, great.
The internet works with us. Completely understand, Doreen. Doreen, oh, hi. Are you using your cell phone now?
I'm using my cell phone. I'm hoping that this will help me not get, I hope I won't get cut off.
Hopefully.
Using my phone. I hope that's okay. Can you see me clearly?
It's better than before. Yeah.
Yeah, trust me.
I was listening in on
the internet issues. Don't worry about it. It happens.
Yeah. I was listening in on your conversation, and I wanted to say that the Rastafarians took Nyabingi from the Bachiga to Jamaica, and the difference in pronunciation is just because of perhaps the Jamaicans not knowing the original language. So that's how it was pronounced differently. But it's the same. It is the...
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doreen. I didn't know that.
We were reading it on Sunday, and we were just like, Binky's in the story, and we wanted to find out, like, what is the origins of it? Is it coincidence, or there's a connection? So thank you so much for making that connection.
Yeah, I should have done my research. I should know this.
No. But that's the beauty of literature. It's able to connect across time.
It's usually
it's beautiful. Thank you.
It's usually the other way around, where we've picked things from the West. So it's nice to know that there are some things that have traveled from here.
Oh, for sure. Because for me, what I know from folklore, from my grandparents and from my dad, is that Nyabingi was a god who is kind of personal to Rwandans and Bachigas, because we share a border. So it is always a spillover.
I need to do my research now, because this is really fascinating. And thank you so much for that, Doreen. Doreen, before you got cut off, I wanted to talk, because you both approach grief, but very differently. Doreen, you have a lot of humor in your story. From Mr. Coma, from you said that, I was cackling. I keeled over laughing. I was like, this is something only a child would do. Yes. Thinking Mr. Coma, and then and also there's a very cynical humor that I think children have, where they're able to see very clearly what us as adults we try to add nuance to. So we try to go, oh, there's this war and the rebels, and children are just like, you all are fighting. I don't see the difference. You're destroying everything. So I wanted to ask about your approach with, why did you choose your child as your protagonist? And what difference does that add to your story? Or was it that you just didn't see it being anyone else but a child telling this story?
Actually, it was quite deliberate. I chose a child because I was asking myself why we in Uganda seem to have such a violent history. We are very friendly people. We are known for being very friendly, and yet the flip side is, at least on the state level, quite a lot of violence with coups. And I said, perhaps it's something that is carried down from generation to generation. So I was asking myself, are we teaching this violence? So I said I wanted to see a young person to kind of explore that question, perhaps by having it be a young person that is learning violence through the people he admires, like the old man, the Mzee in the story, or through what he witnesses. And I can imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if this boy became a soldier instead of either turning away 180 degrees away from it, or saying this is the only way I can revenge Coma's death. This is now beyond the story. So it was deliberate to have a younger character to talk about the legacy we are passing on from generation to generation. And in terms of the humor, because I knew that the subject was so heavy, and it would really weight down the story. And I didn't want it to be just a one-track kind of story, but humor. I knew that humor is a very good way for the readers to enter and engage with the really heavy material. And of course, teenagers are humorous. Bring a group of teenagers together, and they'll always be cracking jokes, and I think it's a way to maneuver in the world that they're really good at.
I adore stories that are centered around where the main characters are young, because they have a way of staying in the moment and dealing with what has to be dealt with without, and perhaps they have the foresight, but they can really be in the moment.
Yeah, I think it was like just a perfect structure to tell that story from beginning to end. The humor, the childlike, I don't want to say innocent, because it's not innocence. It's just a very frankness where they are looking at exactly what is happening and responding to it in that moment. So that was just chef kiss, beautiful. Thank you so much. I wanted to touch about just a bit about the stories that we pass on, the stories that we tell ourselves, because that comes up in both of your works. Irene, there's the stories that Harriet, the grandmother, would have told Harriet, the grandchild. And these stories are received differently in your stories. So in Irene's story, Harriet is a bit hesitant with receiving this story. Whereas Doreen, when there's stories about wars and the guns, as a teenage boy, he is almost excited about it, very curious about this world. One of them is very realist. The other one feels a bit more spiritual. So can we talk about that? What the stories that we tell ourselves, and what stories we think are necessary for passing on? And I think there are more stories that we use to understand the world around us. So Irene, would you mind talking about that a bit more?
No, for sure. I just want to note that generally I tend to situate my stories during a period in the protagonists' lives when they're most vulnerable. I feel like that's a very fertile place to explore, because when emotions are running high, people do things they wouldn't normally do, And I felt that the heightened grief, I too got to observe, to watch as Harriet's the walls of her beliefs became more permeable, allowing for things that she'd resisted before. But now, through the lens of grief, she could, the last line in the story is, "I'm open to all that is possible." And I felt like that's an arrival at the place that her grandmother would want her to be. But once the grief has, kind of been sanded away by time, as time tends to do, will she still believe this? Will she still be the logical, I want data, I want facts, I want evidence? But generally, so I think that in looking to the past and looking for stories, it's important to not, it's nostalgic. We can wrap them up in bubbles of dreams, but that is not realistic for the lives of the people who told us those stories. We can't just be nostalgic and sort of warp the relevance and the essences of the story. I don't know if I'm being clear, but it's important to pay, right? These stories are important reasonably, because they have to still be three-dimensional people, believable people who are believable, who moved through this world like we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I fully agree. I feel stories are the way we make meaning. You
Yeah.
know, I think we are, they have said, they say humans are meaning making creatures, and events happen and we need to frame them. You know, our brain just works that way. We need to frame them somehow. And I was you know, really moved by your story, Irene, because, you know, she has this great loss, and oh, what does it mean to her? What does it mean to her? I was moved because, you know, my mother's Mchiga, so we called our grandmother Kaka. So it really resonated to me. And in my own story, again, the question of the legacy carried on. How do we make meaning of our past? How do we make meaning of the violence? I mean, there's also good. There's a lot of good to make meaning of. But I contrasted Mzee, the old man, who for him, he has made violence, war a good thing.
Yeah.
That's how he has framed his worth. Who is he? He is a soldier, and he's proud to be a soldier. So it's really interesting how especially, you know, state sanctioned violence. Once you're a soldier, it's okay. You put on a uniform, it's okay to kill. You don't have a uniform, killing is a crime. So it's really the meaning. It's a story you tell. So he has all these stories he makes up about all the wars he has fought, some of them fiction. And it's only the mother who calls him, I forget the word, who says, look, this guy is just, do you want to follow this guy who praises violence? And so I think it's also an issue of masculinity. How do you frame masculinity? You tell stories about strength and about harming others, which in some ways you need to protect yourself. But how do those stories harm, and how do they help? I think is what I was exploring.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, Irene, were you about to say something?
No, it's just a bird hit my window. I don't know if it's okay or if it's.
Hopefully it's fine.
Summertime.
I hope so.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your stories. And I am very curious about your characters and the stories they will be telling of this moment as they go on. So I'm curious to know, are there any plans to extend these short stories into full novels, or are they compact as they are and you're moving on to your next character while this one lives in your head? How do you feel about that? What's the next step for these characters that us as readers, we've become so engulfed in this world and we want to know what is happening next?
You go first, Irene.
Actually, when she was asking the question, I remember the story of yours that I read in Granta, and it's told in the same sort of first-person narrative. And it's just so, you're really good at that point of view. And, you know, you can see the person. And I wonder if it's something about first-person narrative that makes it so that you can put all of yourself, every feeling, every emotion into it. But reading this story that's told in the same sort of voice as the one that I'd read before, it's just like, it's so warm. You have your voice for real. You've mastered it.
Thank you.
But so to come to the question again, you had asked the question that I have now forgotten because I was thinking about what I wanted to say.
Are you extending the story, or is this
okay.
Harriet, or are you planning on developing Harriet further into a novel or a novella, or is this all we're getting from Harriet?
I think this story is pretty much finished. It is been republished a couple of times here in Canada as well. So I feel like I need to move on from that, from Harriet. Although, you know, what they say about all of us, how we have just one story in us and we tell it over and over again, different themes and variations. So I feel like a bit of Harriet might live in the character that I'm writing right now in a novel that I've been writing for 5 years. The pandemic really slowed me down. But I do feel like these themes are there too, about how writing is a form of it's a safe haven for me, and also perhaps for the characters, that you get to create and to have the freedom to speak in your own voice and to create outside of what you have been taught is right or wrong, and you get to really gaze down the tunnels of time and have an analytical way of dealing with everything you know and everything you want to know. That I feel that in that sense, the novel I'm writing has a bit of Harriet in it.
For me, it's actually sort of the other way around. The story was a chapter of a novel I've been writing for a very long time. I've been writing a novel based on Alice Lakwena. She was a rebel, charismatic rebel leader in northern Uganda from 1986 to 1987. And she used unconventional weapons, charms, holy stones, oil, to fight.
Right.
And was actually successful until she was not. But as in writing that novel, I thought about the innocent bystanders, the people who tend to be harmed by war. I wanted very many different voices in the book, and so I thought a friend of mine told me. I told him I was writing about this war, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I was in high school, and the Lakwena army ran through the school." And just that image, it struck me as like, oh, I should put that in and create a story around it. And so it's I like quoting this African proverb: when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so these are the people who suffer when the elephants are fighting. So I wanted and there's another chapter that is of a girl who gets pregnant by a soldier, and that is coming out in transition sometime this year. So I really hope to send it out to publishers this month, and but this particular character doesn't show up again. It's just a glimpse of the people around who are affected by the war.
Oh, I was about to ask, is it a novel in stories where, the through line is the same, but it's different perspectives?
No, it's really a confusion. I don't know what the final format will be, but I have this narrative throughout, but then I just thought I would have these different voices because, in life, nothing ever happens with one main narrator. There's always, I may have my story here, but it affects my neighbor differently. So I wanted to bring in those different kinds of voices so it's a novel with small stories, but with a main story and then little sub-stories, like a Venn diagram.
That is so neat. I've always been fascinated by Alice Lakwena and her spirits movement. Is that that's what it was called, right? Because she did use really unconventional weapons.
Yeah,
I can't wait to read that. I just because I'm fascinated by her. I mean, I know that she caused a lot of harm. She was a woman in a war world that we know always belongs to men, and then women are the sufferers. Yeah,
exactly. And by the way, there was a woman in Kigezi who was fighting the colonial government, and she was filled with the spirit of Nyabingi. So Nyabingi was a goddess, but then Nyabingi was also the name of this woman who led a rebellion. The Bachiga are very rebellious against the colonial government.
Tell me about it.
And that is how the Rastafarians picked up Nyabingi, because they were looking for heroes on the African continent. you know, including Haile Selassie. So for them, it came from that knowledge of that woman who led a short-lived rebel movement. And, you know, they would call the medium, the woman and the medium would be given the name of the goddess.
The goddess.
Yes.
So she said she was what do you call it, anointed by Nyabenji. So that's how we traveled to Jamaica.
Yeah.
I am going to look into this.
So Zakia commented to say that it first came to Jamaica in the 30s and 40s through Leonard Howell, who is known as the father of Rastafari. And so she's saying that the reason that we pronounce it that way, we pronounce it wrong, is because we read it, which as readers, we all know whenever you read something, you're so confident you're saying it right, and then someone is like, that's not how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Thank you
but
so
you know,
much.
the spirit of the name is the same, right? The essence.
Because as you're describing it now, I'm like, yeah, these are stories that I heard growing up, but I did not know the origin of it. And I'm so grateful for being able to connect even deeper through literature, through these stories that you're telling us about it, the stories that you're telling Doreen, the stories that you're telling Irene. Yeah. As we learn more as Jamaicans about our heritage, as we learn more about our connections to Africa through literature, which is something I want to talk to about as we get into the Caine Prize, as we get into the structure of the Caine Prize being an award based in the UK. However, it allows readers like me, readers myself here in the Caribbean, being able to connect with literature coming out of Africa. And just what does the prize mean to you as someone who has been shortlisted, someone who's shortlisted in the pandemic, being able to connect just across the world through your stories? What does it mean to you now, being shortlisted? You can probably walk me through from your email arriving to say that you've been shortlisted up to now as you gear up for your week of events.
What does it mean for me? Well, it's exciting. It's exciting. I've been shortlisted twice before. This was quite early in the millennium, 2004 and 2005. And of course, that was so different because we went to London and we were wined and dined and we met the other shortlisted the other nominees. And it was really nice to just engage with people face to face in a way we haven't now, that I miss so much now that it's online. But on the other hand, because it's online, it's not such a London-centered thing anymore. And for example, now we are having a chat, with a group from Jamaica, with you from Jamaica. So that's really great. So in some ways, having it online has spread the tentacles even more in a good way.
Yes.
It's always exciting and affirming for me. It has been. Well, right now we're in the second wave of the pandemic, and it's a little bit, I don't know if it is surreal or it makes me question what is the importance of literature. What's the importance of writing when people around me, my first cousin died last week, and you actually ask, is this of value? And I still think it is, but it really makes you weigh. I don't know what to say. It's suddenly the seriousness. I think whenever there's death around, you begin to really value life. You value what you're doing, and you value how you spend your days. And I'm just grateful that I'm able to do what I love, even in this time of the pandemic.
Yeah. I'm so sorry to hear about your cousin. Every time I hear anything, a relative texts me or calls me, I worry because I know the situation is quite difficult right now in Uganda.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, as well, when I asked my publisher to please nominate my story for the Caine Prize, my goal was I wanted to be able to travel to London and to to mingle. I love these sorts of events where, you know, everyone has gathered and everyone has gathered to talk about stories and storytelling. It's always a wonderful, very, very beautiful setting to just to be able to know that everyone you're interacting with is interested in the same things that you are. It's a very safe and comfortable space through which to move. But then when I received the news, I mean, I was still really excited that I'd been nominated. For me, it's the first time. And the Caine Prize has been a way for me to discover brilliant writers from Africa. My knowledge of the Caine Prize came from reading a book by Leila Abulela, who was the first winner of the Caine Prize back is it in 2000, I believe. And yeah, so I read at the sleeve of the back, and it's just like came from like, I had never heard of this prize before, but it was around the same time when I was also starting to think about becoming a writer myself. So I looked into it and really discovered a pantheon of voices from Africa that I'd never heard before. I don't know about you, Doreen, but for me, growing up in Uganda and going through O level and A level, you always thought that all the good writers come from Nigeria. Like, I had never heard of the wonderful writers that we had. Why didn't we learn about those? Right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So I discovered really wonderful, and so I'm really excited. Like, I can't say enough good things about the prize. It's just unfortunate that it's what's happening now. But I also believe, like what you said about the tentacles being able to reach out to, being able to encounter people we never would have if we were all in London in the same building. So that's a plus for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for the prize, and I'm really grateful that despite the reasons why we're having it online, just being able to see these events happening, being able to engage with these writers more as readers, and having more options in terms of our participation has been fantastic. And I remember picking up that Leila Abuela book and going, wow.
Have you read it?
Yes, huge Leila Abuela fan, and I would probably not have had that exposure to her and to so many of the other winners if it wasn't for a prize like this. And I know you're going to get this question a lot, but I also know that a lot of people in Rebel Women Lit would be upset if I didn't ask. What advice do you have for writers out there right now? I know you probably get this question a whole lot, and please remind them to practice. And what does it mean for you as a writer? Irene said that you pushed your publisher to shortlist you. What does it mean as a writer now in the 21st century? What does it mean for you to be a writer? What does it mean for you to get the recognition that you deserve?
Yeah, I mean, writing it's an act that's quite isolating. I mean, I love it. I love being alone with my computer and just being able to do that. But when you're writing with the intention of sharing your stories with the world, and then you're writing in Canada about stories that are about Uganda, and then publishing them in Canada, it's a very marginalizing space. So yeah, my publisher had never heard of this prize. I don't blame them. Perhaps they don't publish people who, would want. So I was really grateful when I told them about it, and they went ahead and did it. And that it has brought me to this place now where I can be on the same panel as Doreen Baingana, who I had read before. And tomorrow I get to be in a conversation with Jennifer Nansubuga, whose novel I'm about to finish, and who's talk about seeing yourself in stories. It's been really gratifying for me. And what I would say to someone who wants to emerge as a writer, you said in your group there might be people who are writing and hoping to publish, is just you wake up every morning and you decide that you are a writer, whether you have published yet or not yet, whether you've been rejected 1,000 times. If you decide that you are a writer, you're the one who decides that. It's not. Someone once told me that being a writer is a title that you give to yourself and you own it. Perhaps being an author, that's something people give to you, but being a writer, that's who you are. And you work every day and you wake up every morning and you decide that that's who you are. So then you do what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo what Irene has said. Believe in yourself. Believe in yourself in action, which is writing, getting up and writing every day. Whether you feel recognized or not, the more you keep doing it, the more something will come out. Believe in yourself. I believe those of us who, you had mentioned Irene being marginalized, even on the larger landscape of writing in English, African writing seems to be on the periphery, but or even writing from the African diaspora in general. I think we, just because we haven't been in the so-called center of those writing in English, is that we have so many stories that have not yet been told.
Yes.
So our stories are still fresh. Our stories are still, there's still so much to explore that perhaps we have told orally, but maybe not in writing. There's just still so much space for us. And now with mediums like this, we're able to talk to each other across, across the globe, which is really exciting. And so, right, the space is getting larger and larger and more generous, and we have lots of stories that haven't been told. So I can
Yeah,
keep repeating
stories,
myself. So write them.
all stories that were told for us by people who were not
Yes.
asked, and then now we get to tell them differently in a way that is more personal to us and perhaps more truthful, if I can say that. That if you read Uganda through the lens of a white person who had come to Uganda and lived there for a while, maybe as a colonialist or maybe as there's always that sort of imperialist lens, having a middleman tell a story. It's different from when it comes from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes, and this feels like it comes back full circle. Our stories are universal. The stories that we're writing, we are our cento. We don't have to think of the European or the American literature as
Yes.
the cento. We are cento. We are universal. Our stories are important to us, and when we tell them the way that we want, people will relate to them because the
For sure.
through they
Yeah.
are universul.
And
So
good storytelling leaves room for the reader to bring themselves to it. So I read a story, like reading Doreen's story, I could see myself at that age acting in the same way. And someone else who's never been to Uganda can, because they've been children. And and if the story is told in the sense that it leaves room for you to bring yourself, then it's not just Doreen's story, it's all of our story.
definitely.
Yeah.
And as readers in the Caribbean, that's something we experienced as we read your stories. None of us have ever been to Uganda. Few of us have even studied abroad or known what that experience is like. But we were able to put ourselves in that situation. We're able to relate it back to what's happening in the Caribbean, and that's how you have amazing stories that will and should be shared with the entire world. So thank you so much for publishing your stories. Thank you so much for pushing your publishers to getting into the Caine Prize. And thank you to the Caine Prize for providing this platform that you've built over the last 2 decades to keep showcasing these fantastic writers, and for us across the world, us here in the Caribbean especially, to be able to connect with African literature and to find out more about ourselves through African literature. I am still blown away by the Nyabingi connection. So thank you so much for that. And with that, I'm going to end this broadcast. And thanks to everyone who joined in live. This conversation will stay up on our YouTube page. So feel free to share it with everyone else who may have missed it live. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.